I never thought I'd hear those words from my own son. Mom, you're just a burden. After 63 years of love, sacrifice, and dedication, I was reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience. But life has a funny way of turning the tables when you least expect it. When that lottery ticket changed everything, I had a choice to make. And what I did with those millions left my ungrateful son completely speechless. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The arthritis in my hands was getting worse. I could feel the stiffness in my fingers as I tried to dial Frank's number on my old flip phone. At 63, I wasn't exactly tech-savvy, but I managed. The phone rang 4 times before my son finally picked up. "Hey, Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of something," Frank said, his voice carrying that familiar impatient tone I'd grown accustomed to over the past few years. "I'm sorry to bother you, honey. The sink is leaking again, and I can't seem to tighten the pipe myself. My hands just won't cooperate anymore." I hated asking for help, but my modest home in Millfield was starting to fall apart, and my fixed income didn't allow for unnecessary expenses like hiring a plumber. Frank sighed heavily into the phone. "Mom, I told you last time you should just sell that old house. It's too much for you to maintain. Linda and I have been talking about this. You could use the money to move into Cedar Grove Assisted Living." Cedar Grove. The very thought made my stomach turn. I'd visited a friend there once, and the place smelled of disinfectant and despair. The rooms were tiny, and the residents looked more like prisoners than people enjoying their golden years. "I'm not ready for that, Frank. This is my home. Your father and I built our life here. Dad's been gone for 8 years, Mom. You need to move on." His words stung, but I pushed past the pain. "It's just a leaky pipe. It wouldn't take more than 20 minutes to fix. I have the Henderson Project presentation tomorrow, and Linda's taking the kids to soccer. Can't this wait until the weekend? Or better yet, can't you call a plumber? You know I'm on a fixed income, Frank. Social Security only stretches so far, and after paying for my medications this month—" "Here we go again," he interrupted. "Every time we talk, it's about money or something broken in that money pit of a house." I felt my throat tighten. "I've never asked you for money, Frank. Just a little of your time." "Time is money, Mom." His voice rose sharply. "Do you think my life just stops because your sink is leaking? I have a career, a family, and responsibilities. I can't drop everything every time something breaks in that old house you refuse to leave." The silence between us felt heavy. I could hear him breathing, trying to calm himself down. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I shouldn't have called." "No, I'm sorry." But his apology sounded hollow. "Look, I'll try to swing by this weekend, but I can't promise anything. The kids have games, and Linda's sister is visiting from Portland." "I understand. Don't worry about it." I was about to end the call when Frank spoke again, his voice low and frustrated. "Mom, I love you, but sometimes you're just a burden." There, I said it. We all think so. Linda's been saying for years that we need to have a serious talk about your living situation. Just a burden. The words echoed in my mind, stealing my breath away. "I'll figure it out myself," I managed to say before hanging up. I sat at my kitchen table, watching water slowly drip from the pipe under the sink, each drop marking the passing seconds of my seemingly worthless existence. Just a burden. After everything I'd done for my son, the nights I'd stayed up when he was sick, the 3 jobs I'd worked after his father died to put him through college, the unwavering support I'd given him through 2 divorces before he met Linda, this was what I'd been reduced to. My name is Margaret Miller, though everyone has always called me Maggie. I'd been a nurse for 40 years at Millfield General before retiring, and I'd spent my life caring for others. Now, it seemed, no one wanted to care for me. I wiped away tears with the back of my hand and decided I wouldn't sit around feeling sorry for myself. I called my neighbor, Betty Thompson, who lived 3 houses down. Her husband, Roy, had always been handy. "Of course, Roy will come over, Maggie," Betty said warmly. "We'll be there in 10 minutes." True to her word, Betty and Roy arrived quickly. While Roy fixed my sink, Betty made us tea. "I heard Frank's been promoted again at that fancy architectural firm," Betty said, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "Yes, he's doing very well for himself." I tried to sound proud, but the words felt hollow after our conversation. And how are those beautiful grandkids? Emily must be, 12 now? And little James, he must be starting middle school this year. Emily's 14, actually. And James is 11. I realized with a pang that I hadn't seen them in nearly 3 months. Frank and Linda lived just across town, barely a 20-minute drive away. Roy emerged from under the sink, wiping his hands on a rag. "All fixed, Maggie. It was just a loose connection. Should hold fine now." "What do I owe you, Roy?" I reached for my purse. Roy waved dismissively. "Put that away. It took all of 5 minutes. At least let me bake you one of my apple pies as a thank you." "Now that's an offer I'll never refuse," Roy chuckled. "But only if you promise to join us for dinner this Friday. Betty's making her famous pot roast." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt since my phone call with Frank. After they left, I sat down with my weekly lottery ticket, a small indulgence I'd allowed myself since retirement. Every Wednesday, I'd spend $2 on a Mega Millions ticket. My late husband Thomas and I used to joke that it was our retirement investment strategy. We'd never won more than $20, but it gave us something to dream about together. I continued the tradition after he passed, using the same numbers. 7 for the day we met, 15 for our wedding date, 22 for Frank's birthday, 31 for Thomas's birthday, 42 for my birthday, and 9 as the megaball, the number of the hospital room where Frank was born. The drawing wasn't until Friday night, so I tucked the ticket into my wallet and tried to put the hurtful conversation with Frank out of my mind. The next day, I volunteered at the local library as I did every Thursday. I'd been helping with their children's reading program since retirement. The librarian, Sarah Winters, greeted me with a warm smile. "Maggie, thank goodness you're here. We have a new family that just moved to town, and their daughter is struggling with reading. Would you mind working with her today?" "Of course not," I said, hanging my cardigan on the coat rack. The girl's name was Lily Chen, a shy 8-year-old whose parents had recently moved to Millfield from California for work. Her father was an engineer at the new tech company that had opened on the outskirts of town. "I don't like reading," Lily confessed when we sat down together. "The letters get all jumbled up and the other kids laugh at me." "Well, between you and me," I whispered conspiratorially, "I didn't like reading much either when I was your age. But then I found the right book, and everything changed. I pulled out Charlotte's Web, my go-to for reluctant readers, and we began to read together, taking turns with each paragraph. By the end of our session, Lily was smiling. "Can we read more next week?" she asked. "I'll be right here waiting," I promised. As I walked home from the library, I couldn't help but think about Frank's words again. Was I really just a burden? Here was a child I'd just met who seemed to value my time more than my own son did. Friday came, and I spent the morning baking an apple pie for Betty and Roy. The familiar routine of peeling apples and rolling out dough soothed my troubled mind. By afternoon, the pie was cooling on the windowsill, filling my small kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg. I dressed carefully for dinner, choosing a blue dress that Thomas had always said brought out the color of my eyes. I applied a touch of lipstick and pinned my silver hair up the way I used to wear it when I was younger. Looking in the mirror, I saw lines that hadn't been there a decade ago, but also the strength of a woman who had survived loss and loneliness. Betty and Roy's home was warm and inviting, filled with photos of their children and grandchildren. Unlike mine, their family visited regularly. Their daughter, Patricia, lived just 2 streets over and often brought her children to visit. Maggie, you look lovely, Betty said, embracing me. And that pie smells divine. Dinner was delightful. Pot roast with roasted potatoes and carrots, fresh rolls, and lively conversation. For a few hours, I forgot about being just a burden and enjoyed the company of good friends. How's that son of yours? Roy asked over. Coffee and pie. Still designing those fancy buildings? Frank's doing very well, I said, avoiding Betty's knowing gaze. She could always tell when something was bothering me. But, she prompted gently. I sighed. We had a disagreement. He thinks I should sell the house and move into assisted living. Roy frowned. That's ridiculous. You're perfectly capable of living independently. He says the house is too much for me to maintain. I stared down at my coffee. He called me a burden. Betty reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Oh, Maggie, that's not right. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Maybe he's just worried about you, Roy suggested, always trying. To see the best in people. Perhaps, I conceded, though I knew better. Frank wasn't worried. He was inconvenienced. Anyway, let's not spoil a lovely dinner with my troubles. Did I tell you about the new girl I'm working with at the library? We moved on to happier topics, and by the time I walked home, Roy insisting on escorting me despite it being just 3 houses away, my spirits had lifted somewhat. Back home, I remembered the lottery drawing was that night. I turned on the small television in my living room just in time for the announcement. I retrieved my ticket from my wallet and laid it on the coffee table, not expecting anything but enjoying the momentary fantasy of what if. The announcer's voice filled the room. Tonight's Mega Millions numbers are 7, 15, 22, 31, 42, and the Mega Ball is 9. I stared at the screen, then down at my ticket, then back at the screen. The numbers matched. All of them. That can't be right, I whispered to the empty room. I checked again, my hands trembling. 7, 15, 22, 31, 42, and 9. The same numbers I'd been playing for years. Thomas's and my special numbers. The announcer continued. Tonight's jackpot of $342 million remains unclaimed. If you have the winning ticket, please contact the Lottery Commission immediately. $342 million. The room began to spin slightly, and I had to sit down. This had to be a mistake. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. And yet, there it was. Indisputable proof in my shaking hands. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers floating before me. By morning, I'd convinced myself that I'd made a mistake or that I was actually dreaming. But when I checked my ticket against the numbers online, the truth remained unchanged. I, Margaret Maggie Miller, was now a multimillionaire. I didn't call Frank. Not yet. I needed time to think, to process this life-altering event. Instead, I called Betty. Could you come over? And bring Roy if he's home. I need some advice. They arrived within minutes, concern etched on their faces. What's wrong, Maggie? Are you feeling ill? Betty asked, immediately taking my hand. No, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Please sit down. I gestured to the couch. When they were settled, I handed them my lottery ticket. I need you to confirm that I'm not losing my mind. Roy studied the ticket, then pulled out his phone to check the numbers. His eyes widened. Sweet Jesus, Maggie. This is the winning ticket, Betty gasped, looking from Roy to me. The big jackpot? The one they've been talking about on the news? I nodded, still unable to fully comprehend it myself. $342 million. Oh my goodness. Betty jumped up and hugged me tightly. Maggie, this is incredible. What are you going to do? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. What would I do with more money than I could ever spend in my lifetime? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I need to be smart about this. And discreet, at least for now. Roy nodded sagely. You're right about that. You should talk to a financial advisor before you do anything. And maybe a lawyer. Big money changes things, Maggie. It changes how people see you, how they treat you. People like Frank, who already saw me as a burden. How would he see me now? As a burden with a winning lottery ticket? I think, I said slowly, that I'd like to wait before telling Frank, just until I have a clear plan. Betty squeezed my hand. That's probably wise. Take your time, think things through. This kind of money, it's a responsibility as much as it is a blessing. Over the next few days, with Betty and Roy's help, I contacted the Lottery Commission, confirmed my win, and arranged to claim my prize. I opted for the lump sum payment, which after taxes would leave me with approximately $180 million, still an unfathomable amount. On the advice of the Lottery Commission, I hired Janet Webb, a reputable financial advisor, from the city, and Michael Donovan, an attorney specializing in sudden wealth. Both came highly recommended and treated me with respect rather than seeing me as just a confused old woman who'd gotten lucky. The first thing we need to do, Janet explained during our initial meeting, is set up a proper financial structure to protect your assets. We'll create a trust, diversify your investments, and make sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. Michael nodded in agreement. And we need to discuss estate planning, who you want to inherit your assets, any charitable intentions you might have, and how to minimize estate taxes for your beneficiaries. Beneficiaries. Frank and his family would naturally be my primary heirs, but after being called a burden, after years of being treated as an afterthought, I wasn't sure how I felt about simply handing over a massive inheritance to a son who couldn't be bothered to fix a leaky sink. I need some time to think about that, I told them. For now, let's focus on setting up the trust and investment portfolio. 2 weeks passed, and I still hadn't told Frank about my winnings. The money had been transferred to my newly established accounts, the trusts were being set up, and I'd begun making plans. But every time I thought about calling Frank, I remembered his words. Sometimes you're just a burden. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Frank standing there, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Hey, Mom," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I thought I'd stop by and check on that sink. Sorry it took me a couple of weeks to get here." I stepped aside to let him in. "Roy Thompson already fixed it the same day I called you." Frank frowned. "You didn't need to bother the neighbors. I told you I'd get to it." Roy didn't consider it a bother. I led him into the kitchen and put on the kettle for tea, a habit I'd developed over decades of nursing. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thanks." Frank glanced around the kitchen, which looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. "So, have you given any more thought to what we discussed? About selling? The house?" And there it was, the real reason for his visit. Not concern for me, but his continued push to move me into assisted living. "Actually," I said carefully, "I have been thinking about my future quite a lot recently." Frank nodded eagerly. "That's great, Mom. I've been doing some research and Cedar Grove has a waiting list, but there's another place called Sunset Meadows that looks even nicer. It's a bit more expensive, but Linda and I could help out a little." "How generous," I said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. "But I won't be needing financial assistance." "Mom, I know your pride makes it hard to accept help, but you can't afford a nice assisted living facility on just Social Security and your pension." The kettle whistled, and I busied myself making tea, using the moment to gather my thoughts. I hadn't planned on telling Frank about the lottery this way, but perhaps it was time. "Frank," I said as I sat down across from him, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it, Mom?" Frank asked, his expression suddenly concerned. I rarely used that serious tone with him, I took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, I won the lottery. Frank stared at me for a moment before laughing. Very funny, Mom. Is this your way of trying to get me to stop talking about assisted living? I'm not joking, Frank. I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a folder containing the documentation from the Lottery Commission. I slid it across the table to him. $342 million. I took the lump sum payment. Frank's laughter died as he opened the folder and stared at the official papers inside. His face paled, then flushed, cycling through disbelief, shock, and finally, something that looked unsettlingly like calculation. Mom, he breathed, looking up at me with wide eyes. This is incredible. Why didn't you tell me right away? I sipped my tea calmly. I needed time to process it myself. I've spoken with financial advisors and attorneys to make sure everything is properly handled. Of course. Frank nodded rapidly, his mind clearly racing. This changes everything. You won't have to worry about money ever again. We can get you into the best retirement community, or you could even stay here and hire full-time help. I set my cup down carefully. Yes, it does change everything. But not in the way you might think, Frank's brow furrowed. What do you mean? When I called you about the sink, you told me I was a burden. The word still stung, even with millions of dollars now cushioning the blow. Frank had the decency to look embarrassed. Mom, I didn't mean that. I was stressed about work and… You meant it, Frank. I held up a hand to stop his excuses. And it wasn't just what you said. It's been building for years. The missed visits, the forgotten birthdays, the way you pushed me to move into Cedar Grove because it would be more convenient for you. That's not fair, Frank protested. Linda and I both work full-time and the kids have so many activities. We're just concerned about your well-being. My well-being. I nodded slowly. Tell me, when was the last time you asked about my friends or my volunteer work at the library? When was the last time you invited me to Sunday dinner or brought the kids over just to visit? Not because you needed something? Frank opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to come up with an answer. You see me as an obligation, Frank. An elderly burden who needs to be managed. But I'm still a person with hopes, dreams, and a life of my own. Of course you are, Frank said quickly. And now with this money, you can do whatever you want. We could even look at one of those luxury retirement villages in Florida. I'm not moving to Florida, and I'm not moving to Cedar Grove or Sunset Meadows, I said firmly. I'm staying right here in the home your father and I built. Frank's expression faltered. But Mom, this house is so old, and with your arthritis, with my money I can renovate it to be exactly what I need, I interrupted. I can install rails in the bathroom, lower the countertops, put in one of those walk-in tubs. I can hire people to maintain the yard and clean the house. Well, sure, if that's what you want. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his seat. So, what are your plans for the rest? That's a lot of money for just home renovations. And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. Not, are you okay? Or, how can I help? But, what about the money? I've established a trust, I said. Portion has been set aside for my living expenses and healthcare needs for the rest of my life. A generous amount has been allocated for Emily and James's college education and future needs. Frank's face brightened at this. That's wonderful, Mom. The kids will be so grateful. I hope so, I said. Because I'm teaching them a lesson their father seems to have forgotten, that family is about more than just money or convenience. Frank's smile faded. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned forward. It means that I'm not simply handing over millions of dollars to a son who couldn't spare 20 minutes to fix his mother's sink. The rest of my fortune is going into a carefully structured set of trusts and foundations with very specific conditions. Conditions? Frank's voice had taken on a wary edge. Yes, conditions. My attorney helped me create what we're calling a family reconnection trust. You, Linda, and the children will receive monthly stipends. Comfortable, but not extravagant. Additional funds will be released for major life events and emergencies. But I'm not finished, I said calmly. To receive the full inheritance I've set aside for you, there are requirements. Weekly family dinners, regular visits with your children, active participation in family events and holidays, a demonstrated effort to rebuild our relationship. Frank stared at me in disbelief. You're using your money to force me to visit. You? Not force, Frank. Incentivize. There's a difference. I took another sip of tea. And it's not just about visits. It's about genuine connection. The trust includes provisions for family counseling, which I've arranged with Dr. Samantha Reeves, one of the best family therapists in the state. This is ridiculous, Frank spluttered. I'm your son, not some charity case you can control with purse strings. And I'm your mother, not some burden you can shove in a home and forget about, I countered. I've spent my entire life putting others first. My patients, your father, you. Now I have the means to create the life and family relationship I deserve. Frank stood up abruptly. I need some air. He walked out of the kitchen and through the front door without another word. I remained at the table, hands wrapped around my cooling tea. I'd expected anger, but the reality of his reaction still hurt. After a few minutes, I heard the front door open again, and Frank reappeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression more controlled. I'm sorry I walked out, he said stiffly. This is just a lot to process. I understand, I replied. Take all the time you need. The trust doesn't officially activate for 30 days. I wanted to give you time to consider everything. Frank nodded slowly. So what happens if I decide I don't want to participate in this arrangement? Then you'll receive a one-time inheritance payment when I pass. Enough to be meaningful. But a fraction of what you'd receive through the trust. The rest would go to charities I've selected. And the kids' college funds? Those are guaranteed regardless of your decision, I assured him. I would never punish my grandchildren for their father's choices. Frank ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. I need to talk to Linda about this. Of course. Why don't you bring her and the children over for dinner next Sunday? We can discuss it as a family. Frank hesitated, then nodded. Okay, Sunday dinner. After he left, I called Betty and Roy to come over. I needed to talk with someone who would understand what I'd just done. You did what? Betty exclaimed when I explained my trust arrangement. Was it too harsh? I asked, suddenly doubting myself. Roy shook his head. It wasn't harsh at all, Maggie. It was brilliant. You're not just throwing money at the problem, you're using it to heal your family. Betty nodded in agreement. Frank needs this wake-up call. And the fact that you're involving a family therapist shows this isn't about punishment. It's about rebuilding. Their support reassured me, but I still felt uneasy about Sunday's dinner. Would Frank show up? And if he did, would it be the beginning of healing or the final fracture of our relationship? Sunday arrived bright and clear, a beautiful spring day. I spent the morning preparing Frank's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted potatoes, fresh rolls, and apple pie for dessert. As I worked in the kitchen, memories flooded back. Thomas teaching young Frank how to knead dough, family dinners filled with laughter, the comfort of simply being together. At precisely 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a dishcloth and went to answer it, my heart pounding. To my surprise and relief, there stood Frank, Linda, Emily, and James, all dressed nicely as if for a special occasion. We brought wine, Frank said, holding out a bottle of Merlot. And flowers. Linda stepped forward with a beautiful bouquet of spring tulips. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched. Please come in. Dinner's almost ready. Emily, now a teenager with her mother's blonde hair and her father's green eyes, gave me a shy hug. Hi, Grandma. Dad told us you won the lottery. That's pretty cool. I hugged her back, savoring the moment. It was quite a surprise, but the real jackpot is having you all here for dinner. James hung back, absorbed in his handheld game until Linda gently took it from him. Say hello to your grandmother, James. Hi, Grandma, he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. I couldn't blame him. We'd grown so far apart that I was practically a stranger to him. I heard you're quite the soccer player. Now, I said, trying to bridge the gap. Maybe you could show me some of your moves in the backyard after dinner. He perked up slightly. Sure, I guess. Dinner began awkwardly, with stilted conversation and long pauses. But as the meal progressed, the atmosphere gradually warmed. Emily talked about her school play. James opened up about his soccer team, and Linda shared stories from her job as an elementary school principal. Frank remained mostly quiet, observing the interactions with an unreadable expression. It wasn't until we were serving dessert that he finally addressed the elephant in the room. So, Mom, we've been talking about your proposal. He glanced at Linda, who nodded encouragingly. We want to make this work, not because of the money, but because you're right. We've been letting our relationship slip away, and that needs to change. I felt a tightness in my chest begin to loosen. I'm glad to hear that, Frank. But, he continued, we have some concerns about the structure you've proposed. It feels a bit forced, like we're checking boxes to get an allowance. That was never my intention, I said softly. I want genuine reconnection, not performances. Linda spoke up. We've been thinking that instead of a rigid schedule of visits and activities, maybe we could work with Dr. Reeves to create a family reconnection plan that feels natural to all of us. I considered this. That sounds reasonable. What did you have in mind? For starters, Frank said, we'd like to invite you to Sunday dinner at our house next week. And maybe you could come to James's soccer game on Saturday. He's playing in the semifinals. James looked up from his pie. Yeah, I'm starting forward. You should come, Grandma. I'd love that, I said, smiling at my grandson. The conversation flowed more easily after that, with all of us offering suggestions for family activities and ways to spend time together. By the end of the evening, we had the beginnings of a plan that felt genuine rather than transactional. As they were preparing to leave, Frank pulled me aside. Mom, there's something else I want to talk to you about. That house you keep saying Dad and you built together, it's falling apart. Not just the sink. The foundation has issues, the wiring is outdated, and the roof needs replacing. I sighed. I know. I've been getting estimates, but even with the lottery money, I've been hesitating because of all the disruption. What if, Frank said carefully, instead of trying to renovate this place, we build you a new home, something designed specifically for your needs, but still with the character and memories you love. We could build it on the empty lot next to our house. I stared at him, surprised. Next to your house? Frank nodded. You'd have your independence, but we'd be right there if you needed anything. And the kids could visit whenever they wanted. You'd want me living that close? I asked, unable to keep the doubt from my voice. Frank's expression softened. Mom, I know I've been a jerk. When Dad died, I think part of me died too. I buried myself in work, in creating my own family. And I pushed you away because seeing you alone reminded me that he was gone. Tears welled in my eyes. Oh, Frank. I'm not making excuses, he continued. What I said to you was inexcusable. But I want to make it right. Not because of the money, but because you deserve better from me. I reached out and took his hand. A new house next to yours sounds wonderful, but let's take it one step at a time. First, let's focus on rebuilding our relationship. Frank squeezed my hand. Agreed, one step at a time. After they left, I sat in my quiet living room, reflecting on the evening. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments and unspoken tensions, But it was a beginning, a genuine beginning. The next day, I met with Janet and Michael to discuss adjustments to the trust. I want to maintain the core principles, I explained, but with more flexibility. The goal is healing, not control. Janet nodded approvingly. I think that's wise, Maggie. And what about the rest of your plans? Are you still considering the community center renovation? Absolutely, I said. During the past weeks, I'd been developing ideas for how to use my newfound wealth to benefit the community that had supported me for decades. In fact, I have a meeting with Mayor Wilson this afternoon to discuss it. The Millfield Community Center had been on the verge of closing due to lack of funding. The building, once the heart of town activities, had fallen into disrepair. My plan was to not only renovate it, but expand it to include a state-of-the-art library section, a senior center with daily activities and after-school programs for children. Mayor Wilson was enthusiastic about my proposal. This would transform Millfield, Mrs. Miller. But it's an enormous undertaking. I have the means and the time, I told him, and I'd like to establish an endowment to ensure its continued operation long after I'm gone. We agreed to form a planning committee with Betty Thompson, who had experience in community organizing, as one of the key members. Over the next few months, several things happened simultaneously. Frank and I began regular sessions with Dr. Reeves, working through decades of unspoken feelings and rebuilding our relationship on a stronger foundation. The community center plans moved forward, with architectural drawings and permit applications underway. And most surprisingly, I found myself developing a close friendship with Lily Chen's parents, who had become regular visitors after Lily's reading sessions at the library. Wei and Mei Chen were both engineers who had moved from California, seeking a quieter life for their daughter. Wei had a background in sustainable architecture, and when he heard about my community center project, he offered his expertise. His innovative ideas for energy efficiency and multi-purpose spaces added a new dimension to the project. You're giving. This town's such a gift, May told me one evening as we shared tea in my kitchen. Lily talks about you constantly. Ms. Maggie says this, and Ms. Maggie taught me that. She's a special child, I said. She reminds me of the joy of discovery, something I'd forgotten in recent years. 6 months after my lottery win, I stood with Frank, Linda, and the children at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Millfield Community Center. Mayor Wilson had insisted on naming the library wing after me, despite my protests. The Margaret Miller Learning Center will serve generations of Millfield residents, he announced to applause from the gathered crowd. A fitting legacy for a woman who has given so much to our community. Frank squeezed my shoulder. Dad would be so proud of you, Mom. He would be proud of us, I corrected gently, of what we're rebuilding together. That evening, as we gathered for our now regular Sunday dinner at Frank and Linda's home, I looked around the table at my family. Emily was animatedly describing her latest theater rehearsal, James was showing Linda a new soccer move he'd learned, and Frank was serving the pot roast he'd learned to cook from my recipe. I have an announcement, I said when there was a lull in the conversation. I've made some decisions about my lottery winnings that I wanted to share with you all first. They looked at me expectantly. The community center is well funded and my living needs are secured, I began. I've decided to establish college funds not just for Emily and James, but for every graduating senior from Millfield High who maintains a B average and demonstrates financial need. Mom, that's amazing, Frank said. Additionally, I'm creating a nursing scholarship at the hospital where I worked for 40 years, specifically for individuals seeking second careers in healthcare. Linda smiled warmly. Just like you did when you went to nursing school after working as a secretary. I nodded, pleased that she remembered that detail from my life. Exactly. What about the Family Reconnection Trust? Frank asked, his expression open and curious rather than defensive. It's still in place, but with the modifications we discussed. It's less about checking boxes and more about cultivating genuine relationships. I looked directly at my son. But I want you to know, Frank, that seeing you every week these past months, watching you teach James how to fix things around my house, hearing about your day, that's worth more to me than any lottery jackpot. Frank's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I was so wrong, Mom. You were never a burden. Never. 1 year after winning the lottery, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The new community center was nearing completion, its modern architecture seamlessly blending with Millfield's historic downtown. My relationship with Frank and his family had deepened beyond what I'd dared to hope for, and my new home, a beautiful single-story craftsman built on the lot next, to Frank's, was almost ready for me to move in. But perhaps the most unexpected change was my growing circle of friends and activities. At 64, I was busier and more fulfilled than I'd been in years. "Grandma, are you ready?" Emily called from the front door. "We're going to be late for the committee meeting." "Coming, dear," I replied, grabbing my tablet, a gift from Frank, that I'd initially resisted, but now couldn't imagine living without. Emily, now 15, had surprised everyone by volunteering to serve on the Youth Advisory Committee for the community center. Her enthusiasm for the project had drawn us closer, giving us something meaningful to share. We drove to the town hall where the committee meetings were held in my new car, a sensible but comfortable SUV that was easier on my arthritic joints than my old sedan had been. Mayor Wilson greeted us warmly as we entered the conference room. "Maggie, Emily, perfect timing." Wei was just about to review the final plans for the Learning Center technology setup. Wei Chen stood at the front of the room with a digital presentation, displayed on the wall screen. His daughter Lily sat nearby, her legs swinging as she read a book. Her reading skills had improved dramatically over the past year, and she was now at grade level. "As you can see," Wei explained, pointing to the diagram, "we've designed the computer lab to be adaptable for various age groups. Senior classes can be held in the mornings, after-school programs in the afternoons, and community college satellite classes in the evenings." I nodded approvingly. "What about accessibility features for users with visual or mobility impairments?" Wei smiled. "Excellent question, Maggie. We've incorporated the latest adaptive technologies." As the meeting progressed, I felt a deep sense of pride watching Emily engage thoughtfully with the planning process, offering insights about what would appeal to her peers. She'd grown so much over the past year, not just taller, but more confident and compassionate. After the meeting, I invited Wei, May, and Lily to join us for lunch at Millfield's newest restaurant, a charming farm-to-table cafe that had opened downtown thanks in part to a small business grant program I'd established through the Millfield Community Foundation. "I can't believe the center opens next month," May said as we were seated. "It feels like we just started planning yesterday." "Time flies when you're having fun," I replied with a smile. "Though I must admit, I'll be glad when the constant meetings taper off. My social calendar is getting a bit overwhelming." Emily laughed. "Grandma's more popular than I am these days. She's in like 3 book clubs, volunteers at the library, takes Tai Chi twice a week, and has dinner parties like every other night." "Don't exaggerate, dear," I chided gently, though she wasn't far off. Between my community involvement, family time, and new friendships, my days were satisfyingly full. "How are the preparations coming for the housewarming party?" Wei asked. "Almost done," I replied. "Frank and James have been setting up the backyard for the event. Linda's handling the catering, and Emily's in charge of music." "Mom says we can come," Lily said eagerly. "Will there be other kids?" "Lots," Emily assured her. "All the grandchildren from Grandma's friends are coming, plus the kids from your reading group at the library." After lunch, Emily and I drove to Frank's house to check on the party preparations. The backyard had been transformed with strings of lights, comfortable seating areas, and a newly installed patio perfect for entertaining. "Mom, what do you think?" Frank asked as he showed me the setup. "Too much? Not enough?" I squeezed his arm. It's perfect, Frank. Thank you for doing all this. He smiled down at me, the lines around his eyes crinkling. It's the least I can do. Besides, James and I had fun putting it together. Right, buddy? James, now 12 and sprouting up like a weed, nodded as he adjusted one of the speakers. Dad taught me how to run the electrical for the lighting. It was pretty cool. Your grandfather would have been proud, I told him. He was quite the handyman himself. Dad says I'm a lot like Grandpa, James said, a note of pride in his voice. You are, I agreed, feeling a lump in my throat. He had the same determined look when he was concentrating on a project. Later that evening, I sat with Frank on his back porch, watching the sunset while Linda helped the children with homework inside. So, the big move is next week, Frank said, handing me a glass of iced tea. Any second thoughts about leaving the old house? I considered the question thoughtfully. Some nostalgia, certainly. Thomas and I built so many memories there. But it's time for something new, a home that reflects who I am now, not just who I was then. Frank nodded. I think Dad would understand. He was always more practical than sentimental. True, I chuckled. He'd probably tell me I should have sold that drafty old place years ago. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, something that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Mom, Frank said finally, I never properly thanked you. For what? For giving me a second chance, for not just writing me off when I treated you so poorly. His voice was thick with emotion. You could have just taken your millions and moved. To Florida or somewhere far away from me and my thoughtlessness. I reached over and took his hand. You're my son, Frank. I never stopped loving you, even when your words hurt me deeply. I think about what I said to you that day, calling you a burden, and I feel physically ill, he admitted. How could I have been so callous? We all say things we regret when we're stressed or frustrated, I said gently. What matters is that you recognized it and changed. Not because of the money, but because you wanted to. Frank looked at me intently. You really believe that? That I didn't just change because of the inheritance? I do, I said sincerely. The money was just a catalyst, a wake-up call. The real change came from within you. He seemed to relax slightly. Sometimes I worry that if the money hadn't come along, we'd still be distant, that I would have kept taking you for granted until it was too late. We can't know that, I replied, but I prefer to believe that we would have found our way back to each other eventually. The lottery just sped up the process. The day of my housewarming party arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for an outdoor celebration. The new house gleamed in the sunshine, its craftsman details reminiscent of the home Thomas and I had shared, but with modern amenities and accessibility features that made it ideal for my current needs. Grandma, come see, James called, dragging me by the hand toward what would be my new study. Dad and I made you a surprise. I followed him into the room, which I had last seen empty except for the built-in bookshelves Frank had designed. Now those shelves were filled with my books, arranged exactly as they had been in my old house. But what caught my eye was the wall opposite the window, where a beautiful quilt hung in a custom frame. That's the quilt Mom made, I whispered, referring to my own grandmother who had crafted the heirloom when I was born. Dad found it in your attic, James explained proudly. He had it professionally cleaned and preserved. Cool, right? Very cool, I agreed, blinking back tears. The quilt had been stored away for years, forgotten in the bustle of daily life. Seeing it displayed so prominently, treated as the treasure it was, touched me deeply. Frank appeared in the doorway. Do you like it? I remembered how you used to tell me stories about Mom and her quilting when I was little. It's perfect, I said, embracing him. Thank you for remembering. The party began at noon, with guests arriving steadily until the yard was filled with friends old and new. Betty and Roy were among the first to arrive, bringing a beautiful potted Japanese maple for the front garden. It's symbolic, Betty explained. They live for hundreds of years, so this tree will watch over your home long after we're gone. Dr. Reeves came with her husband and teenage daughters, all of whom had become friends through our family therapy sessions. Mayor Wilson arrived with several town council members. The Chen family brought a traditional Chinese wall hanging for good luck in my new home. Even Sarah from the library attended with her husband and young son. As I looked around at the gathered crowd, I was struck by how many connections I'd formed in just 1 year. Before the lottery, my social circle had shrunk to just a few close friends. Now, I was surrounded by people of all ages and backgrounds who had become meaningful parts of my life. Linda approached with a glass of champagne. A toast to new beginnings? I took the glass with a smile. To new beginnings. You know, she said as we clinked glasses, you've inspired me. Have I? She nodded. Watching you reinvent yourself this past year, not just spending your money, but using it purposefully to create the life you want and help others. It made me rethink some things in my own life. Like what? I asked, curious. I've been the elementary school principal for 15 years, she explained. I love it, but I've always had this dream of starting a specialized program for children with learning differences, like dyslexia or ADHD. Something that would give them the tools to succeed without making them feel different or less than their peers. That sounds wonderful, I said encouragingly. Well, Linda continued, a note of excitement in her voice. I've been talking with the school board about piloting such a program at Millfield Elementary next year, and they're interested, especially since they know the new community center's learning facilities could be a partner resource. Linda, that's marvelous. Have you told Frank? She smiled. Yes, and he's been incredibly supportive. Actually, he suggested I talk to you about possibly establishing a foundation specifically for learning differences, research, and education. He thought you might have some insights from setting up your other charitable initiatives. I'd be happy to help, I told her sincerely, and I think it's a cause well worth supporting. As the afternoon progressed, I found moments to connect with nearly everyone who had come to celebrate with me. Emily introduced me to some of her school friends who had arrived later. James proudly showed off the backyard lighting system he had helped install to an impressed group of his peers. Frank manned the grill, serving up burgers and hot dogs with good-natured efficiency. Toward evening, as the party was winding down, Roy clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. If I could have a moment, he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. I'd like to propose a toast to our friend Maggie. The chatter quieted as people turned toward him. Many of you know that Maggie had some extraordinary good fortune. Last year, Roy continued. But what you might not realize is how extraordinary Maggie herself is. Some people who receive sudden wealth become isolated, suspicious, or self-indulgent. Not our Maggie. Betty stepped up beside her husband. Instead, she used her good fortune as a tool to strengthen her family bonds, build community resources, and create opportunities for others. The Maggie we're celebrating today isn't remarkable because she won the lottery. She's remarkable because of what she chose to do with her winnings. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment at being the center of attention, but the warm smiles surrounding me eased my discomfort. Mayor Wilson raised his glass. To Maggie Miller, whose generosity will benefit Millfield for generations to come. To Maggie, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Frank stepped forward next, his expression serious. I'd like to say something too, if I may. He turned to face me directly. Mom, a year ago I said something unforgivable to you. I called you a burden, the most hurtful and untrue thing I could possibly have said. My heart raced. I hadn't expected Frank to reference that painful moment so publicly. What I've realized since then, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, is that you have never been a burden. You've been a gift. To me, to our family, to this community. a gift I almost threw away because I was too self-absorbed to see it. Emily and James moved to stand beside their father, Linda joining them to form a united family tableau. "The lottery didn't change who you are, Mom," Frank said. "It just gave you the resources to express more, fully who you've always been, generous, thoughtful, and loving." I sipped my tea, giving him space to continue. "Do you remember when I was in college, my interest in sustainable housing? The designs I used to sketch for affordable, eco-friendly homes?" "Of course," I replied. "You were so passionate about it. Your senior thesis was on modular housing solutions for low-income communities." Frank looked surprised. "You remember that?" "I still have a copy in my keepsake box," I admitted. "Your father was so proud of that work." Frank's expression softened. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Wei Chen and I have been discussing a potential collaboration, a small firm focused on sustainable, affordable housing. Design, starting right here in Millfield." "Frank, that sounds perfect for you," I said sincerely. "There's a growing need for it," he continued, his enthusiasm building. "With housing costs rising, many working families are priced out of decent homes. We could design solutions that are environmentally responsible and economically accessible." "What does Linda think about all this?" "She's completely supportive," Frank said. "Actually, it was her idea initially. She pointed out that if she's following her passion with this statewide program, I should consider what would make me truly fulfilled too." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Your father always said you had the soul of an artist and the mind of an engineer. This venture sounds like the perfect blend of both." "There's one more thing," Frank said, his nervousness returning. "Wei and I would need startup capital. I've been looking at options, small business loans, tapping into my 401k, but it's a considerable risk." I understood immediately what he wasn't saying. "And you're concerned that if you ask for my financial support, it might seem like you're only reconnecting with me because of the money." Frank winced. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I know you," I said gently. "Frank, we've spent 2 years rebuilding our relationship. I know your heart now, and I trust your intentions." "So, what do you think?" he asked hesitantly. "I think," I said carefully, "that we should discuss this with Janet Webb. As it happens, I've been looking for meaningful investment opportunities that align with my values. A sustainable housing initiative sounds very much in line with those values." Frank's relief was palpable. "You'd consider it?" "More than consider it," I assured him. "But as a proper investment, not just a handout. We'll structure it professionally, with clear expectations and boundaries. That way, you can pursue your passion while maintaining your independence." The tension left Frank's shoulders. "That sounds perfect, Mom. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I cautioned with a smile. "Janet drives a hard bargain." After Frank left, I called Betty to share the news. She was delighted, but not surprised. "I always thought Frank was wasting his talent on those soulless office buildings," she declared. "This suits him much better. And speaking of news, have you heard about the senior housing proposal?" "What proposal?" I asked. "The town council is considering converting the old Westridge Hotel property into affordable senior apartments," Betty explained. "It's a beautiful location by the river, but the building needs extensive renovation. They're looking for community input, especially from seniors who might potentially live there." The idea immediately captured my interest. Millfield had a growing senior population, many on fixed incomes who struggled with housing costs, and the Westridge, though neglected for years, had been a gracious building in its heyday, perfectly situated within walking distance of downtown and our new community center. "There's a public meeting next Tuesday," Betty continued. "You should come." "I will," I decided. "In fact, I think I'll do some research beforehand. This could be an interesting project to support." By Tuesday, I had compiled a folder of information on successful senior housing initiatives in similar communities, focusing on models that promoted independence, community integration, and affordability. The meeting was held in the community center's main hall, with Mayor Wilson presiding. The Westridge property has been vacant for nearly a decade, the mayor explained to the assembled crowd. The owner has agreed to sell to the town at a reasonable price given its condition. Our challenge is funding the necessary renovations and determining the best management approach. Various community members spoke, most in favor of the senior housing concept but concerned about costs and logistics. When my turn came, I approached the microphone with my folder in hand. "My name is Margaret Miller," I began, "and as a senior citizen myself, I strongly support this initiative. However, I believe we need to think beyond basic housing. What we have is an opportunity to create a model senior living community that preserves independence while fostering connection." I outlined my vision: apartments of various sizes to accommodate different needs and budgets, common areas for social activities, a shared garden, a health clinic, and most importantly, a location that kept seniors integrated with the broader community rather than isolated. As for funding, I concluded, I propose a public-private partnership. I'm prepared to make a significant investment through the Millfield Community Foundation, if the town is willing to commit to making this a truly innovative senior living solution. Mayor Wilson looked stunned. "Ms. Miller, that's an extraordinarily generous offer. The council would certainly be interested in discussing such a partnership." What followed was a lively community discussion, with seniors offering insights about what would make such housing truly livable. By the end of the meeting, a steering committee had been formed, with me as one of 7 members tasked with developing a detailed proposal. As people were leaving, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She appeared to be in her 70s, elegantly dressed but with a worried expression. "Ms. Miller? I'm Virginia Harmon. I wanted to thank you for speaking up about senior housing. My lease is being terminated next month. The owner is selling the building. And at my age, finding affordable housing feels nearly impossible." We talked for several minutes about her situation, which I discovered was distressingly common among Millfield's senior population. Virginia had worked as a librarian for 40 years, but now lived on a modest pension that barely covered her basic needs. "Would you be willing to join our steering committee?" I asked impulsively. "We need voices like yours, people who understand firsthand the challenges seniors face." Virginia agreed readily, and by the time we parted, I had a new friend and a strengthened commitment to making the Westridge project a reality. That evening, as James helped me prepare dinner, a weekly tradition that had evolved naturally over the past year, I shared my day's experiences. "So you might help build apartments for old people?" he asked, chopping vegetables with impressive skill for a 13-year-old. "Senior citizens," I corrected gently. "And yes, that's the idea." James considered this as he added the vegetables to the stir-fry. "Could we design it so people could have pets? Mrs. Henderson next door had to give away her cat when she moved to Cedar Grove, and she cried for like a week." His observation touched me. "That's an excellent point, James. Many seniors have to give up beloved pets because of housing restrictions. We should definitely make our design pet-friendly." "Cool." He nodded. "And maybe there could be a game room? Not just for old-fashioned games, but video games too. I bet lots of seniors would enjoy playing if someone showed them how." "Another excellent suggestion," I said, impressed by his thoughtfulness. "Would you be willing to share these ideas at the next steering committee meeting?" James looked startled. "Me? What would I know about senior housing?" "You just proved you have valuable insights," I pointed out. "Sometimes the best ideas come from unexpected perspectives. Besides, this project will serve the community for decades. Shouldn't young people have input on its design?" He seemed to grow taller with the responsibility. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I could ask my friends for ideas too. Perfect. I smiled. That's exactly the kind of intergenerational collaboration we need. Over the next few months, my life found a new rhythm. Mornings were often dedicated to the scholarship program and community center activities. Afternoons frequently involved meetings, with Frank and Way about their sustainable housing initiative, with the Westridge Steering Committee, or with Elaine Martinez about the hospital position I'd ultimately accepted. Evenings and weekends were for family and friends. Sunday dinners that now routinely included the Chen family, movie nights with Emily and her friends, soccer games where James was emerging as a team leader, and quiet moments with Betty and Roy, whose friendship had been my anchor through all the changes in my life. The Margaret Miller Learning Center at the community building had become a particular source of pride, with Lily Chen now volunteering as a reading buddy for younger children, just as I had once helped her. The center's director, Sarah Jenkins, had expanded the program to include ESL classes for Millfield's growing immigrant population, creating a welcoming space for newcomers to the community. On a crisp fall afternoon, nearly 2.5 years after winning the lottery, I found myself back in the office of Janet Webb, my financial advisor. Our quarterly reviews had become less about investment returns and more about strategic philanthropy, how to use my wealth most effectively to create lasting positive change. The Sustainable Housing Fund is performing exceptionally well, Janet reported, reviewing the portfolio on her tablet. Frank and Way's first project has already received national attention in architectural circles. I nodded, proud but not surprised. The duplex they had designed and built on the edge of town, energy efficient, constructed with sustainable materials, and affordably priced, had been purchased by 2 young families, a teacher and a firefighter who otherwise couldn't have afforded homes in Millfield. And the Westridge renovation is on schedule, Janet continued. The first residents should be able to move in by spring. Virginia Harmon would be among those first residents, having become not just a committee member, but a dear friend over the months we'd worked together. Her insights had shaped many aspects of the project, from practical considerations like non-slip flooring and accessible storage, to less obvious needs like privacy spaces for residents to visit with grandchildren. Overall, Maggie, Janet concluded, you've created a remarkable legacy, not just in terms of buildings or programs, but in how you've transformed the fabric of this community. As I drove home from the meeting, I reflected on Janet's words. Legacy. It wasn't something I'd consciously considered when making my post-lottery decisions. I'd simply tried to address needs I saw around me, to use my unexpected fortune in ways that felt meaningful. Approaching my house, I noticed unusual activity. Several cars parked outside, including Linda's SUV and Betty's sedan. Puzzled, I pulled into the driveway. It wasn't anyone's birthday, and we had no planned gathering that I could recall. As I opened my front door, a chorus of voices called out, "Surprise!" The living room was filled with family and friends. Frank, Linda, Emily, and James, Betty and Roy, the Chen family, Virginia Harmon, Mayor Wilson, Sarah from the library, Dr. Martinez, and many others who had become part of my expanded circle. "What's all this?" I asked, genuinely confused. Frank stepped forward with a small, gift-wrapped box. "Happy lottery anniversary, Mom. It's been exactly 2.5 years since that winning ticket changed all our lives." I was touched that he remembered the date. "You didn't need to do all this." "Actually, we did," Linda said warmly, "because that lottery win didn't just change your life. It changed all of ours, in ways we never could have anticipated." Emily, now a poised 17-year-old, handed me a scrapbook. "We made this for you, Grandma. It's a record of everything that's happened since you won." The beautifully crafted book contained photos, news clippings, handwritten notes, and mementos chronicling the community center opening, Frank and Way's sustainable housing launch, the Westridge renovation, family gatherings, and countless small, moments that might otherwise have been forgotten. "Turn to the back," James urged. The final pages contained handwritten messages from everyone present, expressions of gratitude, affection, and admiration that brought tears to my eyes. Frank's message particularly touched me. "Mom, when I called you a burden, it was the worst mistake of my life. You have never been a burden. You've been a blessing, a teacher, and the strongest person I know. Thank you for giving me the chance to become the son you deserve." I looked up at the gathering of people who had become my community. Some I'd known for decades, others who had entered my life only after the lottery. Each relationship was precious, each connection meaningful in ways no amount of money could measure. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, overwhelmed by their gesture. "You don't need to say anything," Betty assured me. "Just know that while you may have won the lottery, we're the ones who truly got lucky to have you in our lives." The celebration continued into the evening, with food and laughter and stories shared among people who might never have connected without the ripple effects of that winning ticket. As I watched Emily teaching Virginia how to use Instagram and James deep in conversation with Way about sustainable building materials, I marveled at how interconnected our lives had become. My son had once called me just a burden when I asked for help with a leaky sink. Now, surrounded by this vibrant community, I realized that what had seemed like the most painful moment of my life had ultimately led to its greatest blessings. The lottery millions had changed my circumstances, certainly. But the true wealth I'd gained couldn't be measured in dollars. It was here in this room, in these relationships, in the knowledge that I'd used my unexpected fortune to create connections that would outlast the money itself. When that winning ticket appeared in my life, I could have chosen bitterness or revenge. Instead, I'd chosen healing and growth. And that choice, not the money, was what had truly transformed everything. 3 years after the lottery win that changed everything, I found myself sitting in the audience at Millfield High School's graduation ceremony. The warm June sun streamed through the windows of the auditorium as Principal Harris called Emily's name. My granddaughter strode confidently across the stage in her blue cap and gown, accepting her diploma with a brilliant smile. As class valedictorian, she'd already delivered a moving speech about community and opportunity that had brought tears to many eyes, including mine. "I can't believe she's going to Stanford in the fall," Linda whispered beside me, her voice a mixture of pride and wistfulness. "It seems like just yesterday she was starting kindergarten." Frank, on my other side, reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for making this possible, Mom." "Emily earned that scholarship all on her own," I reminded him. While I had established a college fund for my grandchildren, Emily had been awarded a prestigious merit scholarship that would cover most of her expenses. "I'm not just talking about college," Frank clarified. "I mean all of this. Her confidence, her sense of purpose. Working with you at the community center these past few years has shaped who she's become." He was right. Emily had blossomed since becoming involved with the youth programs at the Margaret Miller Community Center. What had begun as occasional volunteer hours had evolved into a leadership role, with Emily coordinating a mentoring program that paired high school students with elementary children who needed additional support. The experience had informed her college plans, a double major in education and public policy, with the goal of developing programs to expand educational access for underserved communities. After the ceremony, we gathered in the school courtyard for photos and congratulations. Emily was surrounded by friends and teachers, her academic honors cord and community service medallion gleaming against her gown. "Grandma!" she called, breaking away to embrace me. "Did you see Dr. Chen in the audience? She came to watch me graduate." Dr. Mei Chen had become an important mentor to Emily, encouraging her interest in educational policy and writing one of her college recommendation letters. "I saw her," I confirmed. "The Chens are joining us for the celebration dinner, along with a few others." Emily's eyes widened. "You didn't tell me you were planning a party." Your father wanted it to be a surprise, I explained with a smile. Just family and close friends at the house. Best grandmother ever, Emily declared, hugging me again before racing off to take photos with her classmates. The small gathering Frank had planned turned out to be closer to 30 people. Family, friends, and key figures from Emily's high school years. Our backyard was transformed with strings of lights, flowers, and tables laden with catered food from Emily's favorite restaurants. James, now 14 and nearly as tall as his father, had helped set everything up and was proudly serving as unofficial host, directing guests to the food and beverages. His soccer team had made it to the state championships that year, and his growing confidence was evident in the easy way he conversed with adults and peers alike. Quite a spread, Betty commented, joining me at a quiet corner table where I was taking a moment to observe the festivities. Frank certainly went all out. He's so proud of her, I replied. And rightly so. Betty nodded, settling into the chair beside me. Speaking of pride, I heard the governor is coming to tour the West Ridge Senior Living Community next month. Word is, they're considering it as a model for a statewide initiative. The West Ridge had been open for 6 months now, with all 52 units occupied and a waiting list that demonstrated the pressing need for affordable senior housing. Virginia Harmon had been elected as the first Residence Council president and had implemented a range of community integration programs, including one where residents volunteered at the elementary school as classroom grandparents. I hope they do replicate it, I said. Every town needs housing where seniors can remain independent without being isolated. Well, you certainly started something special here in Millfield, Betty said, patting my hand affectionately. Roy and I were just saying the other day that the town feels different now, more connected, more vibrant. She was right. The changes went beyond the visible projects like the community center and the West Ridge. There was a renewed sense of possibility in Millfield, a belief that community challenges could be addressed through collective effort and creative thinking. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Catherine Winters, the new superintendent of Millfield Schools. She'd been hired the previous year with a mandate to improve educational outcomes across the district. Maggie, I've been hoping to catch you, Dr. Winters said after greeting Betty. Do you have a moment to discuss something? Betty excused herself, with a knowing smile, and Dr. Winters took her seat. I've been reviewing the success of Linda's program for students with learning differences, she began. The results are remarkable. Improved academic performance, decreased absenteeism, and significantly higher parental engagement. I nodded, proud of my daughter-in-law's achievements. Linda's program had expanded from a small pilot to a district-wide initiative, earning recognition at the state level. What you might not know, Dr. Winters continued, is that we've identified another population with specific, unaddressed needs, children being raised by grandparents or other older relatives. This caught my attention. How many students are we talking about? Nearly 60 across the district, with the number growing annually, Dr. Winters replied. These children often face unique challenges: disrupted family structures, emotional trauma, economic insecurity, and their caregivers, many of whom are seniors, struggle to navigate a school system that's changed dramatically since they parented the first time around. I understood immediately. Technology, teaching methods, even homework expectations. Everything is different now. Exactly, Dr. Winters nodded. I'd like to establish a targeted support program for these families, similar to what Linda developed, for learning differences. Resources for the grandparents, specialized counseling for the children, and community connection points. It sounds like a wonderful initiative, I said, already mentally listing potential partners and resources. I was hoping you might consider being involved, Dr. Winters said. Your experience with both the senior community and educational programs at the center makes you uniquely qualified. Perhaps as an advisor or program liaison? The request was unexpected but intriguing. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week to discuss the specifics. Perfect, Dr. Winters smiled. I'll have my assistant contact you to set it up. As she departed to congratulate Emily, I found myself energized by the prospect of this new project. It would bridge the senior advocacy work I'd been doing with my long-standing commitment to educational opportunity, a perfect synthesis of my interests. The party continued into the evening with speeches from Frank and Linda, a video montage of Emily's life created by her friends, and finally, a toast from the guest of honor herself. I want to thank everyone who helped me reach this milestone, Emily said, standing tall and poised beyond her 18 years. My parents, who always supported my dreams, my teachers, who challenged me to think critically, my friends, who made even the hardest days fun. She paused, turning to look directly at me. And especially my grandmother, Maggie Miller, who taught me the most important lesson of all, that true wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give to others. The gathering erupted in applause, and I blinked back tears, deeply touched by her words. Later, as guests began to depart, Emily found me helping to clear dessert plates. Did you mean what you said in your toast? I asked her quietly. Every word, she affirmed. Watching you these past few years, how you've used your lottery winnings to make real change in people's lives, it's shaped what I want to do with my life more than anything else. I hugged her tightly, this remarkable young woman who had grown from a shy teenager into a passionate advocate for others. I couldn't be prouder of you, Emily. After the last guests had gone and the cleanup was complete, I sat with Frank on the back porch, enjoying the peaceful evening. Linda had taken the children home to prepare for a family trip the next day, a week at the beach before Emily's summer. Internship began. That was a lovely party, I told him. Emily will remember it always. Frank smiled, leaning back in his chair. I wanted it to be special. These milestones matter. They certainly do, I agreed, thinking of how many of Frank's milestones Thomas and I had celebrated over the years. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. You know, Frank said eventually, I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately. Have you? I turned to study his profile in the dim porch light. He nodded. Emily's graduation got me reflecting on what we pass down to our children, intentionally or not. Values, habits, perspectives. He paused. Wounds. I waited, sensing he had more to say. When I called you a burden that day, Frank continued, his voice quieter now, I was echoing something I'd heard my whole life. Not from you or Dad, but from the culture around us. This idea that older people are problems to be solved rather than resources to be valued. His insight surprised me. Frank had apologized many times for his hurtful words, but he'd never analyzed their deeper source. I carried that toxic perspective without even realizing it, he admitted. And I might have passed it on to Emily and James if things hadn't changed. But they did change, I reminded him gently. Because of your wisdom, not mine, Frank said. When you won the lottery, you could have just cut me off, moved to a beachfront condo somewhere, and lived your best life without the son who treated you so poorly. That wouldn't have been my best life, I told him honestly. Family was always my greatest treasure, even when it was painful. Frank reached over and took my hand. You created a different legacy with your lottery winnings, Mom. Not just buildings or programs, but a new way of seeing. A perspective that values connection over convenience, wisdom over youth, giving over having. His words echoed my own reflections, from the Westridge Project and the Community Center initiatives. I never thought of it that way, I acknowledged. I was just trying to address needs I saw around me. That's exactly it, Frank said earnestly. You saw needs that most people ignore, and in addressing them, You've changed how an entire community views aging, family relationships, and collective responsibility. A realization struck me. That's why Emily's going into public policy, isn't it? She wants to create systemic change. Frank nodded. She talks about scaling the Millfield model, taking what you've demonstrated here and finding ways to implement similar approaches in other communities. The thought was both humbling and exhilarating. When I'd decided how to use my unexpected fortune, I'd never imagined the ripple effects would extend beyond Millfield, let alone influence my granddaughter's life path. And James? I asked. How do you think all this has affected him? Frank smiled. Haven't you noticed his project for the science fair this year? Solar-powered tiny homes for transitional housing? He's combining his interest in renewable energy with Way's sustainable design principles and your focus on housing access. I laughed softly. He didn't get that idea from me. He did, though, Frank insisted. Not directly, but through the values you've demonstrated. James has grown up watching his grandmother use resources to solve community problems. It's shaped his understanding of what success looks like. The notion that my choices had influenced my grandchildren's values and aspirations filled me with profound gratitude. What greater legacy could there be than seeing the next generation embrace principles of compassion and community responsibility? What about you? I asked Frank. How has all this changed your perspective? He considered the question thoughtfully. Remember when I used to measure success by project budgets and client portfolios? I nodded, recalling his fierce ambition in those corporate architecture days. Now I measure it differently, Frank continued, by the young family who can afford their first home because of our sustainable design, by the senior who doesn't have to choose between medicine and rent because of affordable housing options, by the immigrant who finds community at the center's ESL classes. It was a profound transformation from the man who had once called his mother a burden because fixing a leaky sink would take 20 minutes away from his busy schedule. The money changed our circumstances, Frank acknowledged, but your choices changed our hearts. That's the real miracle of these past 3 years. The following morning, I had breakfast with Virginia Harmon at the small cafe that had opened, adjacent to the community center. It had become our weekly tradition, a chance to catch up on Westridge developments and community news. The garden committee has finalized the plans for the community plots, Virginia reported, stirring her tea. We've reserved 2 raised beds specifically for the elementary school's science program. Wonderful, I approved. James mentioned that his old teacher, Mrs. Gonzalez, was looking for ways to teach sustainable agriculture. Virginia nodded. She's already scheduled a planning meeting with our garden coordinator. The children will start seedlings in their classroom this fall, then transplant them to our garden. Another intergenerational connection, I noted with satisfaction. Speaking of connections, Virginia said, lowering her voice slightly, have you heard about Roy Thompson? What about him? I asked, immediately concerned about my old friend. Virginia's eyes twinkled. He's been spending a great deal of time with Elaine Martinez. They take walks together every morning, and he's been teaching her watercolor painting. Roy and Elaine? I was surprised, but delighted. Roy had been a widower for nearly a year now, after Betty's peaceful passing in her sleep. We'd all worried about him living alone, despite the regular visits from friends and family. They make a lovely couple, Virginia continued. Both intellectually curious, active in the community, and the way he looks at her when she's speaking, it's quite touching. The news warmed my heart. Roy had been devastated by Betty's death, but she would have wanted him to find companionship and joy again. After breakfast, I walked to the community center for my meeting with the scholarship committee. We were reviewing applications for the new vocational training grants, a program designed to support students pursuing careers in skilled trades rather than traditional college paths. Passing through the main hall, I paused to watch a guitar. Class in progress. The instructor, a retired music teacher named Paul Garrett, was showing a group of seniors and teenagers how to form basic chords. The intergenerational nature of the class exemplified the center's philosophy that learning and growth happen best in community, across age boundaries. In the committee meeting, we selected 8 recipients for the inaugural vocational grants. Future: electricians, plumbers, healthcare technicians, and culinary professionals who would receive funding for certification programs and required equipment. These grants fill a crucial gap, noted committee member David Torres, who worked as a career counselor at the high school. College isn't the right path for everyone, but skilled trades offer stable, well-paying careers with real community impact. His observation reflected a broader shift in Millfield's educational approach, a recognition that success took many forms and that the community needed diverse talents and skills to thrive. After the meeting, I visited the center's administrative offices to review plans for the upcoming Millfield Heritage Festival. The annual event had been revitalized under the center's sponsorship, evolving from a small-town fair into a celebration of Millfield's history and cultural diversity. The Chen family is coordinating the International Food Pavilion, reported event director Sophia Williams. And the Historical Society has put together an amazing exhibit on Millfield's industrial past, including oral histories from retired factory workers. What about the new immigrant showcase? I asked, referring to a planned highlight of families who had recently made Millfield their home. 17 families participated, Sophia confirmed. Representing 12 countries, they'll share traditional music, art, clothing, and stories about their journeys to Millfield. The festival embodied what Millfield was becoming, a community that honored its past while embracing new perspectives and experiences, a place where different generations and cultures found common ground. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Mayor Wilson, who had become a friend as well as a political ally over the past 3 years. "Maggie, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening," he began. "There's something important I'd like to discuss with you." "Not at all, Robert," I assured him. "What's on your mind?" He cleared his throat. "As you may know, I'm not running for re-election next year. 2 terms is enough for anyone, and it's time for fresh leadership." "You've served Millfield admirably," I said sincerely. "Your support for our various initiatives has been invaluable." "That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss," the mayor continued. "The town council and I have been talking about ensuring continuity for the positive changes that have taken root here. We believe Millfield needs a leader who understands both the town's history and its potential future." I waited, unsure where this was heading. "Maggie, we'd like you to consider running for mayor." The suggestion was so unexpected that I laughed. "Me? Robert, I'm 66 years old. Hardly the time to launch a political career." "Age brings wisdom," he countered. "And you've demonstrated more vision and practical leadership in the past 3 years than most politicians show in a lifetime." "I'm flattered," I said, still processing the idea. "But I'm not a politician." "That's precisely why you'd be effective," Mayor Wilson argued. "You care about outcomes, not optics. You listen to everyone's perspective before making decisions, and you've earned the respect of all segments of our community." "I'd need to think about this," I told him honestly. "Of course," he agreed. "Take all the time you need, but Maggie, please give it serious consideration. What you've started here deserves the chance to flourish under the right leadership." After we hung up, I sat in my living room, turning the unexpected proposal over in my mind. Mayor of Millfield. The idea was simultaneously absurd and strangely compelling. 3 years ago, I had been a retired nurse living on a fixed income, considered a burden by my own son, my world shrinking with each passing year. Now I was being asked to lead the town I'd called home for most of my life. The lottery winnings had opened doors, certainly, but it was the choices I'd made with those winnings, the relationships built, the needs addressed, the opportunities created that had truly transformed not just my circumstances, but the fabric of the community itself. My son had once called me just a burden when I asked for help with a leaky sink. Now, people were asking me to help lead an entire town toward a more inclusive, connected future. What a journey it had been, and what possibilities still lay ahead, unfolding like the pages of Emily's graduation scrapbook, rich with potential and promise. Whether or not I decided to run for mayor, one thing was certain. The burden my son had once perceived had become a blessing that touched countless lives, creating ripples of positive change that would continue long after the lottery money was gone. And that, I reflected as I watched the stars emerge in the evening sky, was the most priceless winning of all. 4 years after winning the lottery, I found myself standing on the stage of Millfield's newly renovated town hall, taking the oath of office as mayor. The decision to run hadn't come easily, but after months of consideration and countless conversations with family and community members, I had embraced the opportunity to serve. I, Margaret Ann Miller, do solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution and faithfully discharge the duties of Mayor of Millfield. As I repeated the words, I caught Frank's eye in the audience. He sat with Linda, James, and Emily, who had flown home from Stanford for the inauguration. My son's face shone with a pride that still moved me, even after our years of reconciliation and healing. The campaign had been unexpectedly invigorating. Rather than traditional political events, I had hosted community conversations in living rooms, at the senior center, in school cafeterias, and at local businesses. We discussed Millfield's challenges and opportunities with a focus on collaborative solutions rather than divisive rhetoric. My opponent, a local businessman named Richard Dawson, had initially dismissed me as the lottery lady playing politics. But as community support for my candidacy grew, he was forced to engage more substantively with my vision for the town's future. In the end, I won with 63% of the vote, a clear mandate for the inclusive, intergenerational approach that had guided my community work. After the swearing-in ceremony, we held a reception at the community center. Emily had created a photo display charting the transformation of Millfield over the past 4 years, the community center's evolution from abandoned building to vibrant hub, the Westridge Senior Living Community's development, Frankenways, sustainable housing projects, the revitalized downtown, and numerous smaller initiatives that had collectively changed the town's trajectory. "Madam Mayor," Wei Chen said with a warm smile as he approached me with a glass of champagne, "that has a nice ring to it." "I'm still getting used to it," I admitted, accepting the glass. "How's the expansion going?" Wei and Frank's sustainable housing firm had recently broken ground on their largest project yet, a mixed-use development that would include affordable family apartments, small business spaces, and community gardens. "On schedule and under budget," Wei reported proudly. "The prefabricated components are working even better than we projected, both for cost control and environmental impact." "And May's research grant?" I asked, referring to his wife's recent breakthrough in educational technology for students with learning differences. "Renewed for another 3 years," Wei beamed. "The university was impressed with the pilot results from Linda's program. They're talking about establishing a permanent research center focused on inclusive education practices." Our conversation was interrupted by James, now 15 and towering over both of us. "Grandma, sorry, Madam Mayor, they're asking for you to cut the celebration cake." "Just Grandma is fine," I assured him with a smile. "The Madam Mayor formality is only for official city business." As we made our way toward the cake table, James mentioned casually, "Dad told me about the old Cedar Grove place closing down. Cedar Grove Assisted Living, the facility Frank had once been so eager to move me into, was indeed shutting its doors after failing multiple safety inspections and facing declining enrollment." "Yes, the remaining residents are being relocated to Westridge or other facilities," I confirmed. "The building will be repurposed as part of the community college's healthcare training program." "It's kind of ironic, isn't it?" James observed with the directness of adolescence. Dad wanted to put you there because he thought you were a burden, and now you're the mayor deciding what happens to the building. Out of the mouths of babes. Life takes unexpected turns, I said diplomatically, though his observation had struck a chord. The important thing is that everyone from Cedar Grove will have better living situations. The cake-cutting ceremony was followed by brief remarks from various community leaders, including Dr. Catherine Winters, who had become a close ally in educational initiatives. Mayor Miller's leadership philosophy can be summed up in one word: connection, she noted in her speech. Connecting generations, connecting resources with needs, connecting diverse perspectives to create innovative solutions. This approach has transformed Millfield from a town where many felt isolated, seniors, immigrants, young families struggling to make ends meet, into a community where everyone has a place and a purpose. Her words resonated with my own sense of what we'd accomplished together. The lottery winnings had provided financial resources, certainly, but the true catalyst for change had been the intentional creation of bridges between previously disconnected segments of our community. After the reception, I returned home to find a package waiting on my porch, a gift from Virginia Harmon and the Westridge Residents Council. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden plaque bearing a quote from anthropologist Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. The gesture touched me deeply. From being viewed as a burden to being recognized as a catalyst for positive change, the journey had been remarkable by any measure. My first official act as mayor was to establish the Millfield Community Cabinet, an advisory group that included representatives from all sectors of town life. Unlike traditional municipal committees, this cabinet intentionally paired younger and older members to encourage mentorship and fresh perspectives. A high school student worked alongside a retired business executive on economic development. A young mother collaborated with a senior citizen on parks and recreation planning. The initiative drew attention from neighboring communities and eventually from state officials interested in our governance model. When a reporter from the regional newspaper asked what had inspired this unconventional approach, I shared a version of my personal story, how being dismissed as a burden had motivated me to demonstrate the value of intergenerational cooperation. The wisdom of age and the energy of youth aren't opposing forces, I explained. They're complementary resources that achieve more together than either could alone. 6 months into my term, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Richard Dawson, my former election opponent. He had largely disappeared from public life after the election, and I was curious about the purpose of his visit. "I've been watching what you're doing," he said after the initial pleasantries. "This community cabinet of yours, the way you're approaching the downtown revitalization, the new transportation initiative for seniors and students." I waited, unsure where this was heading. "I was wrong about you," Dawson continued, his tone genuinely contrite. "I dismissed your candidacy as a wealthy woman's vanity project, but what you're building here is substantive and sustainable. It's making a real difference in people's lives." His acknowledgement was unexpected but welcome. "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot coming from you." "I'd like to be part of it," he said, surprising me further. "Not in politics. That's clearly not my forte. But I do know business development. If there's a way I could contribute to the economic initiatives, I'd welcome the opportunity." This was precisely the kind of community engagement I had hoped to foster, moving beyond political divisions to focus on shared goals and complementary skills. By the end of our meeting, Richard had agreed to co-chair the Downtown Business Alliance with a young entrepreneur who had recently opened Millfield's first tech startup. As summer approaches, Emily returns from her freshman year at Stanford, bubbling with excitement about an urban development course that had used Millfield as a case study. "My professor was amazed by the integrated approach you've taken," she reported over Sunday dinner. "Most towns tackle housing, economic development, and social services as separate issues, but Millfield is addressing them as interconnected challenges. That's your grandmother's healthcare background showing through, Frank commented. In nursing, you learn quickly that treating isolated symptoms without addressing the whole patient rarely works. Emily nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And I've been invited to present our family's story at a conference on community revitalization next fall. They're particularly interested in how the lottery winnings were leveraged to create sustainable change rather than just one-time projects. Our family's story? I questioned, uncertain about having our personal journey become public discourse. Not the private details, Emily assured me quickly. Just the broader narrative of how being called, just a burden, ultimately led to a reimagining of intergenerational relationships and community resources. Looking around the table at my family, Frank and Linda holding hands, James explaining his latest science project to Emily, all of us sharing a meal and conversation in a home built on reconciliation and renewed connection, I marveled at how far we had come from that painful phone call about a leaky sink. The lottery millions had opened doors, but it was the choices made, the relationships restored, and the community built that constituted the true wealth in my life. From burden to blessing, from isolation to connection, a journey I could never have imagined when that winning ticket first appeared in my hands. 5 years to the day after winning the lottery, I sat in my mayoral office reviewing the final plans for what we were calling the Next Chapter Initiative. The comprehensive program would expand Millfield's pioneering approach to neighboring communities, creating a regional network of intergenerational resources and support systems. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting my assistant with the budget reports I'd requested. Instead, it was Frank, carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorites. "Happy lottery anniversary, Mom," he said with a warm smile. "I thought we might have lunch to celebrate." At 68, I had learned to treasure these spontaneous moments with my son. "That sounds wonderful. Let me just finish signing these grant approvals." As I gathered my things, Frank examined the large map on my office wall detailing the Next Chapter Initiative's scope. "This is impressive," he commented. 7 communities adopting variations of the Millfield model, each with their own unique adaptation, I explained, joining him on the map. Riverdale is focusing on their immigrant integration programs, while Pine Hills is emphasizing environmental sustainability. The framework remains the same: intergenerational cooperation, resource sharing, connection-based planning. But the applications vary based on local needs. "Just as it should be," Frank nodded approvingly. "One-size-fits-all solutions rarely work for community development." We walked to Josephine's, a charming cafe that had opened in Millfield's revitalized downtown, where a table awaited us on the outdoor patio. The spring air was fresh and mild, trees budding along the newly designed pedestrian plaza where residents of all ages gathered on benches and at chess tables. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Frank asked after we ordered. "If you hadn't won the lottery, I mean." It was a question I'd contemplated often over the years. "I do," I admitted, "but not in the way you might expect." Frank raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. "The lottery provided resources, certainly," I explained. "But the real catalyst for change wasn't the money. It was the moment of clarity that came from hearing you call me a burden." Frank winced slightly, though we'd long since moved past the pain of that exchange. "That moment forced me to confront some difficult truths," I continued. "About aging in America, about family dynamics, about how communities either support or isolate their vulnerable members. And winning the lottery gave you the means to address those issues," Frank added. "Yes, but more importantly, it gave me leverage to create space for those conversations," I corrected gently. "Money opened doors, but it was the relationships formed, the connections made, that created lasting change. Our food arrived, fresh salads and the cafe's famous tomato soup," a recipe contributed by Virginia Harmon from her family cookbook. As we ate, Frank shared news about James, now 16 and developing a mobile app to help senior citizens navigate technology. He's testing it with Virginia and the Westridge Council, Frank explained proudly. They're giving him feedback on user interface and functionality. He says seniors are the most honest beta testers. They don't sugarcoat their opinions. I laughed, thinking of Virginia's forthright manner. I can imagine. Emily's flying in next weekend, by the way, Frank's continued. Her presentation at that community development conference led to a summer research position with the Urban Institute. They're documenting successful revitalization models across the country. That's wonderful, I said, feeling a surge of pride in my granddaughter's accomplishments. She specifically mentioned wanting to interview you about the burden to blessing framework she's developing, Frank added. Apparently, it's becoming something of a case study in her department at Stanford. The thought that our family's journey had academic relevance still surprised me. What had begun as a painful personal interaction had evolved into a template for rethinking intergenerational relationships and community resources. After lunch, Frank walked me back to Town Hall, where I had an afternoon meeting with the Regional Planning Commission. Before we parted, he handed me a small wrapped package. Just a little something to mark the occasion, he said. Inside was a silver keychain with a custom-designed pendant, a small sink faucet on one side, and the Millfield town seal on the other. From leaky pipes to leadership, Frank explained with a gentle smile. A reminder of how far we've come. The thoughtful gift brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I said, embracing him. For this, and for the man you've become. I had a good example to follow, he replied simply. That evening, I attended the graduation ceremony for the first cohort of the Millfield Healthcare Training Program. 24 students who had completed certifications in nursing assistance, emergency medical services, and medical administration. The program, housed in the repurposed Cedar Grove building, represented another full-circle moment in our community's evolution. As I delivered remarks congratulating the graduates, I couldn't help but reflect on my own nursing career and how it had informed my approach to community leadership. Healthcare had taught me to look for root causes rather than just treating symptoms, to value preventive measures as much as interventions, and to recognize that healing happens best in supportive environments. Today, you join a noble profession, I told the graduates, one that understands that care isn't just a service provided, but a relationship cultivated, that healing involves treating the whole person, not just the illness. Millfield needs your skills, your compassion, and your commitment as we continue building a community where everyone thrives. After the ceremony, I spoke with several graduates, including a woman in her 50s who had retrained after being laid off from a manufacturing job, and a young man who had moved to Millfield specifically for the program after hearing about our community initiatives. Mayor Miller, the young man said earnestly, my grandmother raised me after my parents died, and she faced so many challenges trying to navigate systems that weren't designed with her situation in mind. When I read about what you've created here, the intergenerational approach, the support networks, the way you're redefining community, I knew this was where I wanted to build my career. His words affirmed the ripple effects our work was having, beyond Millfield's borders. Each person touched by these initiatives carried the impact forward in their own lives and communities, creating an expanding network of positive change. The following day brought another milestone, the ribbon cutting. For Miller Commons, the mixed-use development Frank and Way had designed as their most ambitious project to date. Located on the site of a former factory, the complex included 60 affordable housing units, spaces for small businesses and community services, shared gardens, and renewable energy systems that made it nearly self-sufficient. As I prepared to deliver remarks at the opening ceremony, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Dr. Rivera, the administrator who had once overseen Cedar Grove Assisted Living. We hadn't spoken since the facility's closure 2 years earlier. After the ceremony, he approached me with an extended hand. "Congratulations, Mayor Miller. This is an extraordinary achievement." "Thank you, Dr. Rivera," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm pleased you could attend. I owe you an apology," he said, surprising me. "When Cedar Grove closed, I blamed your administration's stringent oversight for our financial difficulties. But seeing what you've created here, and throughout Millfield, I realize now that our model was fundamentally flawed." His candor was unexpected but welcome. "How so?" I asked. "Cedar Grove isolated seniors, physically and socially," he explained. "We treated aging as a medical condition to be managed rather than a life stage to be lived. This," he gestured to the bustling mixed-age crowd exploring Miller Commons, "is the future of elder care, integrated, connected, purposeful." Dr. Rivera went on to share that he had recently accepted a position with a healthcare consortium developing new approaches to aging in place. "Your work here has become something of a blueprint," he acknowledged, "not just for senior living, but for community design itself." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Linda, who had been unable to attend the ribbon cutting due to a meeting with state education officials about expanding her Learning Differences program. "It's official," she announced excitedly. "The state has approved funding for 10 pilot sites across the region. Teacher training begins this summer with program implementation in the fall." This news represented years of dedicated work on Linda's part, taking her classroom innovations and developing them into a scalable model that could benefit thousands of students. What had begun as a small pilot program in her elementary school had evolved into a transformation of educational practices statewide. "That's wonderful, Linda," I said, genuinely thrilled for my daughter-in-law's professional recognition. "Will you be leading the implementation?" She nodded, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "They've created a special appointment for me, Educational Innovation Director. It means more responsibility, more travel, but also the chance to impact so many more children's lives." "Frank must be proud," I observed. "He is," Linda confirmed, "and grateful for the flexibility his partnership with Way provides. He's planning to handle more of the family responsibilities while I focus on launching the program. This easy give and take. Between them, the mutual support for each other's aspirations and needs represented another transformation that had occurred alongside Millfield's community evolution. Frank and Linda had developed a partnership far more balanced and respectful than the one I had glimpsed years ago, when Frank had unilaterally decided I should move to Cedar Grove without considering my wishes. That evening, I hosted a small dinner gathering at my home. Virginia Harmon and her new companion Harold, a retired history professor she had met at the Westridge, Wei and Mei Chen, whose daughter Lily was now a freshman at State University studying education, Roy Thompson and Elaine Martinez, whose romance had blossomed into a committed partnership, and Sarah from the library, recently promoted to district director. These friends had become my chosen family, a circle of companions who shared both my values and my vision for community building. As we enjoyed a meal prepared collectively, each guest bringing a dish to share, the conversation flowed from personal updates to broader discussions of Millfield's ongoing evolution. "I read something interesting in the regional planning report," Harold mentioned as we lingered over dessert. "Millfield now has the highest intergenerational cohesion index in the state." "What exactly does that measure?" Roy asked. "It's a composite of factors," Harold explained. "Frequency of meaningful interactions between different age groups, shared. Resource utilization, cooperative decision-making processes, mutual support networks. Essentially, it quantifies how well different generations within a community connect and collaborate." 5 years ago, we would have scored near the bottom of that index, Virginia noted. Seniors were isolated in places like Cedar Grove, Yangtze. Families struggled without community support, Teenagers had few meaningful connections with adults outside their families or schools. May nodded thoughtfully. What changed wasn't just the physical infrastructure, the community center, Westridge, Miller Commons. It was the intentional creation of intersections, places and programs that brought different generations together for mutual benefit. Like the Reading Buddy program, Sarah added, which now pairs over 100 seniors with young readers at the library. Or the Technology Exchange, Wei contributed, where teenagers teach computer skills to seniors, who in turn share life skills like cooking or home repair. As I listened to my friends identify the various initiatives that had transformed Millfield from a collection of isolated demographic groups into an integrated community, I realized that what we had created was actually quite simple in concept, if complex in execution. A community that recognized every member as an asset rather than a liability, regardless of age or circumstance. Later, after my guests had departed and I sat alone on my back porch watching the stars emerge, I thought about the extraordinary journey of the past 5 years. From a painful moment of being called just a burden to creating a community model, being replicated across the region, a transformation that had begun with a leaky sink and a winning lottery ticket. The money had been a tool, certainly. But the true catalyst for change had been the decision to use that money not for escape or revenge, but for connection and growth, to transform pain into purpose, isolation into community, burden into blessing. As I prepared to retire for the evening, I noticed a text message from Frank. Found this while going through old photos. Thought you might appreciate it. The attached image showed a much younger version of myself holding infant Frank in my arms, gazing down at him with an expression of pure love. It had been taken in the kitchen of the old house, the same kitchen, where the leaky sink had precipitated our painful exchange years later. I texted back, full circle, from me caring for you to us caring for each other and our community. That's the true lottery win. Sometimes life's most painful moments contain the seeds of its greatest transformations. Being called a burden had hurt deeply, but it had also awakened me to larger truths about aging, family, and community that might otherwise have remained unexamined. The lottery millions had provided resources, but it was that awakening that had given those resources meaning and purpose. 5 years later, the results spoke for themselves, not just in buildings or programs, but in the rekindled relationship with my son, the blossoming lives of my grandchildren, and the vibrant, intergenerational community that had emerged from what once seemed like an irreparable family fracture. From burden to blessing, from isolation to connection, from pain to purpose. A journey I could never have imagined that day when my son's hurtful words and a winning lottery ticket changed everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe. And hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.